there's still much work to be done because part of the role that I play is also discussing the matters of inclusion. And the armed forces are making great changes. It takes time, but if allowed, it can also be forgotten. By having the honorary title of colonel, it gives me access to the rooms and individuals that other men have access to. And I'm very appreciative of that fact. So if I ask to speak to the general, it will happen.
Good day and welcome to Purpose and Protection. I'm your host, Barry Pitcher, and CEO for Commissionaires Nova Scotia. We are very honored to have Mr. Douglas Ruck in the studio with us today. He is a community ambassador, a human rights activist. He is our board chair currently for Commissionaires Nova Scotia and the first Black board chair in the history of our fine organization. We will discuss a lot of great things today, to include the meaningful connection to the number 2 Construction Battalion and the shifts in EDI and what that means to us as both commissionaires and Nova Scotians and Canadians. Welcome to the studio, Mr. Douglas Ruck. It's customary for all our guests to receive a little gift when they come on. So as you know, this is our centennial year, 100 years of service to Canadians, and I would like to present you with one of our honorary coins to display proudly in your office. So thank you.
Thank you, Barry. It's very nice.
So we have lots to talk about today, and I look forward to all my guests, but you in particular, not for only the reasons I said in my introduction, but I do consider you a friend and I consider you a mentor. And I greatly appreciate any time you speak, and your advice to me is always very sound. So I've been on the drive down last night. I thought about all the great questions I could ask. I know we only have so much time, but to get us started, why don't we learn a little bit about who Doug is, where he came from, and maybe your family?
Sure. I was born in the north end of Halifax for the first few years of my life in what at that time was a predominantly Black community. In fact, I was within walking distance of the Halifax Armory.
Wow.
So that's the area that I grew up in those early years. Shortly thereafter, my family moved from Halifax to Dartmouth, which became in many ways a life-changing event. At a very early age of 4 or 5, whatever it was, we may have moved, I was confronted directly with the ugly aspect of racism and discrimination, and spent those early years in Dartmouth, in fact, dealing with that. When my family moved from the one side of the harbor to the other, we were met with a petition to keep us out of the neighborhood. It was felt that a Black family being in Dartmouth, in the suburban community of the Westfall area, would invariably impact negatively upon property values. Wow. And heaven only knows what those little Black kids were going to get up to. So those first years, in fact, from grade primary to first grade 8 or 7, I fought physically. Each day was a physical competition between myself and others in the school, because to say it was predominantly white neighborhood would be understating it. It was a white neighborhood. I was the only Black child at the school. And there was therefore this sense of who are you and what are you doing here? I had one rule with regards to that. I could not afford to lose a physical fight, because I had a younger sister who had been going to school and then eventually a younger brother. For them, I had to make sure that I established myself as somebody you could not push around, but I was not allowed to be a bully. My father would not allow that. And my father and mother were the inspiration that got me through that. And I look back now, I realize how difficult it must have been for them to see their child going to school knowing that he's going to be in a physical altercation, generally before school, at recess, and after school. And it became part of my life to do that. My father had taught me some of the early aspects of boxing. Because I knew that, it gave me an advantage. So most fights didn't last that long, but some were rather ugly. Anyhow, that was those early days. And so right away, I became part of that struggle, because my father was also very involved in human rights, civil rights. Mm-hmm. And he took us that neighborhood, or took us to Dartmouth. He wanted his children to have a backyard. He wanted them to be able to enjoy themselves. to go to certain schools, etc., that he felt he couldn't have the opportunity to deal with in Halifax. So we moved there. And I must say that, as it was an interesting experience, but it was also eye-opening to me. As a young child, I thought we were middle class. As I became older, I realized we weren't middle class. We were poor. We didn't have a lot of money to put together. My father would work 2, if not 3 jobs to make sure that we had food on the table and clothes on our back. So I wanted nothing, but only later years I realized what that meant, how hard he had to work to ensure that we received the things that we wanted as children, so we weren't ostracized in how we dressed or where we lived or how our house was. And he took extra care of his home, his lawn. We took extra care as children not to run across the neighbors' lawns. We would go knock on the door and say, may I come pick up our ball or toy or whatever. We had to make sure that we lived a life that was absent a complaint. And for a young child, it can be an interesting adjustment. But those were the early years of my life as I get to know them.
Wow. So you were obviously fueled from a very early age to effect change. And why from their law? That would seem, why not Golden Gloves? Why not a police officer or something?
Yeah, interesting, because as my father used to tell the story, my father since passed away, he used to tell the story. My father had worked as a porter on the CN Rail.
Yeah.
And one day he took me down to the Halifax station to pick up his check. And he said, a lady there in the pay office, whatever, said to me, once again, probably about 5 or less than 5, are you going to be a porter like your father when you grow up? To which my response is, I said to her, no, I'm going to be a doctor. He said, I didn't know where that came from. I'll know where that came from. All right. I think I may have seen a medical book in the house, and I was fascinated by the pictures and whatnot, and I took that on. And for the early stages of my life in school, I think up to maybe junior high, I was interested in going into medicine. I still have an interest in science and medicine. But because of the struggles, because of what was taking place, I was also following closely what was happening in the United States. And there were certain individuals that caught my attention. Thurgood Marshall, who became a major member of the bar, and then a justice and sat on the federal court. And then Spotswood Robinson. They were major proponents of civil rights. I saw in them an opportunity to make a difference, to use your voice on behalf of yourself and others. And that became my interest. But that didn't start until maybe the latter part of high school. Up until then, I really had been interested in medicine. That's what took me to law. I must say that there were some who thought maybe it would be, as you mentioned, a more physical thing, or there were some who thought maybe the clergy. And I said that would have been an interesting mix. That
but you would have gave great sermons. I know that for sure.
would have been quite the time, but probably not the best example of living a godly life. But yeah, so over the years, I went towards the law as being the field that I chose to spend my time with. And law also, I realized, opened many doors. The fact that when I studied law didn't mean necessarily had to practice law. There were many things you could do with it. And that's proven to be the case in many ways.
What would you say were some of the key highlights from your career in law? I know you've worked with civil human rights. Is there anything that stands out in particular as sort of one of your most proud achievements as a lawyer?
Well, there are different things, I guess. One thing, now once again, when I went to law school, there were only 3 black students, local black students. And I go back just a moment, Barry. When I graduated from high school and went to university, at that time, there were 7 black students across the province who went to university. That became a newspaper article.
Oh, my goodness.
Because it was deemed to be a large number. We're going from high school to university. So in many ways, there's always been these things of establishing first or being precedent setting. On the one hand, one can be proud of that, but at the same time, it can become tiring. You want to get beyond that point. You want to be not the first, but one of many. At the same time, you want to be the first and not the last. Keep those doors open. Keep those doors available to others. So when I saw law, it's been an opportunity for that as well, to get into that. So when I look at what I've done since that time, recently I've released a report on regaining trust, Nova Scotia Barrister Society, To me, that was some days the culmination of my early life, my middle life, and what took place in the practice of law. Because here I was making a statement of all those things we've talked about when it comes to the inequities, the exclusionary aspects. And it was systemic discrimination across the board. So it looked at how in the legal profession people are treating women, how looking at transgender, how looking at people with disabilities. All those things became important. All those things and the intersectionality of all those things means that there are people out there who are being rebuffed, are being denigrated on different levels. So being able to sit down and to work on that document and to present that report to the Bar Society, which is now being implemented, became very significant. And I also had occasion to do a similar document for the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Nova Scotia, looking at looking at the internal anti-Black racism in the organization. Those are important moments. Those are things that I see which speak to a larger audience, and perhaps even more significant now than when I initially got started on them. If you look at what's currently happening in society, and I look only south of the border,
yes,
and not only is there a disregard for diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a direct push against it. But it's not surprising, Barry. It's not surprising at all. Throughout history, whenever there's been major advances made, there's always been met by a major pushback, a major need to reestablish the status quo. And we're seeing that now in a very open, perhaps one of the worst ways I've seen now since the 60s. But it's here, it's with us. So the things that I've been working on previously, which took place in many ways during COVID and the death of George Floyd, and my follow-up that with Black Lives Matter, I think are more significant now than what they were even then. Because now there's been, people have been emboldened to say, we don't want that anymore. You have acquired enough in the way of equality. You've gone far enough. We don't need any more of this. This is now anti-society. So the struggle now is probably greater now than it was even previously. And on one hand, that's discouraging. But I think that hopefully people are prepared to meet that challenge.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We, as you know, we have an EDI committee, and even at the national level, there's discussion of, do we call it EDI? Do we have to have a committee anymore? And I think they're taking example from big corporations that are completely reversing. Some institutes are taking down names of founders, taking away scholarships that were built around equity, diversity, inclusion. And my answer, just speaking for me, was, this defines us as Canadians. If anything, we should double down.
That's right.
On everything we've done over the last few years, and not simply throw it away on the whim of a neighbor.
I agree with you completely. And that's why I think now's the time you need to stand up and proclaim what you've said here. If you don't, then your silence will be viewed as acquiescence not to have these things. So that's why from CNS and other organizations, they need to make it very clear what they stand for. If they don't, then you're going to find that there's going to be pushback and these things will be lost.
Right.
And we're still at the point, and I'll come back to this later on, but we're still at the point where we don't have a critical mass to maintain these things. Right now it means having allyship. It means people working together to make a difference. But it's so fragile. With a stroke of a pen, somebody can take away the rights and can disenfranchise millions of people with a stroke of a pen or based upon a whim. And we're watching it happen in real time. And I can say to you, that's the United States. Yes. But it can happen here in Canada. In fact, it is happening here in Canada in many ways. It's taking place. So we need to be conscious of that fact and how we respond to it.
Yeah, and I would even offer, just based on my very limited experience, but it's not a destination. It's not something where, okay, we've done that, or, we've met that quota, and there really is no metric. I believe, as I'm sure you do, it's a journey.
Very much. It's not a tick-the-box exercise. And when you bring it to an organization, it's not to have a line that deals with on the agenda. It has to be part of the overall discussions. It intertwined with everything, because I am part of all these things. So how can we say we only discuss it at this point in time? We don't. It has to be part of what we do on a regular basis to get things where they need to be. Look, the ultimate objective can be that we no longer have to have it. Imagine I've lived in a world where we no longer required African Heritage Month. Why? Because it's being celebrated not just in February, but 12 months of the year. This pigmentation that I wear proudly, I don't have this only in February. It's here in November, it's here in January, it's here 12 months of the year. I appreciate African Heritage Month. I appreciate the recognition. But we also have to realize that people just don't do these things at this limited time. Right? My culture is with me every day of the year and for all hours of the day.
I think of anyone, you realize the importance of journey and work. When you talk about things like EDI, I'll share with our viewers, when almost 3 years ago now, I've been in this job. When I was being considered for this job, someone dropped a picture of me back in the day when I was a teenager in a German uniform at an Oktoberfest party. The learning part for that from me, and I'll be honest with you, I've been to Afghanistan, I've been a single parent and a police officer. That was probably one of the top 3 traumatic things I've ever been through, mainly because I'm a veteran. My grandfather had fought in World War II, and when I was faced with that, and you was aboard, I was appalled at myself. How could I do something so stupid 33 years ago? And I just wanted to run away. In fact, I went to a very dark place, truth be told, because at the time when you're faced with your own humanity, it can be hurtful. And I remember, and I bring this up because I called you and I remember what you told me. And you told me that's not who you are, and you need to talk through this and tell your story. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. Yeah. But you did. You encouraged me to speak to the board. To the board's credit, they let me come aboard as the CEO. But, for our listeners out there, mistakes don't define you as a human or a leader. And for me, it's been such an opportunity of growth. And, my wife often asks me, what if you met that person who dropped that photo of you so many years ago? And probably the day after, I would have said something rather not nice to release on the air, but certainly now I would thank them. And I think that's a point you get to when you look at the evolution of realizing what true inclusion means, to look back at your blind spots as I have. And I would offer to you, Doug, and to the board that I have worked even harder in the years since to be an ambassador such as yourself. So I wanted to share that, I guess, with our listeners and you, to say thank you for giving me that chance to show who I was.
Yeah. No, thank you, Barry, for sharing it with us and for allowing all of us to look at ourselves. We were all those individuals, no matter where we may come from. We've all gone through different things. And you're right. Our past or our mistakes don't necessarily define us. They may help us grow. In fact, they should do that. So thank you for taking that moment and coming forward and speaking to the board in a very open and frank manner. The very fact that you're here shows what the impact that was. But it goes even deeper than that, right? And as you say, I know how hard you work. I know how very hard you work. But I think it gave all of us a greater incentive that we can all be better. We can all have to look back at ourselves and say, okay, that's back there. I can't get rid of it, but I don't have to live with that. I can move forward. Yeah. And so thank you for taking that move and coming forward and being part of CNS. And as I've told you previously, it has been a significant part of the work of CNS in improving what we do and how we do it. And it's been an interesting journey for all of us, I think, that we've gone through.
So I guess on the theme of that, that's a good segue into the evolution and the reparation and learning from the No. 2 Construction Battalion, which one of the greatest things that I think I've done in my career was be a part of that with you. So maybe we can enlighten the viewers as to your personal family connection and then culminate with the apology.
Yeah, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, also known as the Black Battalion, came about during the First World War. And very quickly when war broke out in 1914, young men from across this country, and we have to stress that we're young men. Women were not at that time able to be part of the armed forces or the Canadian Expeditionary Forces. Young men came from the farms, from the factories, et cetera, and wanted to be part of this great moment in history. As did young black men, but they were told you're not wanted. This is a white man's war. We do not need you. We do not want you. And according to the words of Major General Willoughby Watkins, the civilized Negro is vain and imitative and wouldn't be of use really to the Canadian forces or the Canadian forces. Wrapped up in that was so much, because as I've said, and you probably heard me say, of course, as well before, the civilized Negro versus the what? What does that tell you? And to say that openly, that was a very public statement that denigrated individuals in a very direct manner. So blacks weren't allowed to serve. We're not allowed to serve. And it wasn't until 1916 that change was made, only through petitions and protests, and once again, through allyship, white population as well, speaking on saying these men need the right to serve. And eventually were, but they were put into a non-combat unit or a non-combat battalion. They were a construction battalion. Construction battalions are important, right? That's where the engineering comes from. All this, it's important. But they had expected that they'd be trained as soldiers to fight with rifles on behalf of their country. Instead, they went to war with pickaxes and shovels. And that's what they were allowed to have. And they were only allowed to be with other blacks. It was a segregated battalion. And they had white officers, other than for Reverend White, who served as the chaplain for the battalion, and they finally went overseas. But the discrimination that they met with when they first tried to join didn't end when they went overseas. They continued to find discriminatory practices and be treated as less than and inferior to. And this is one of those stories that's part of Canadian history that would have been lost, but for the work of my father, late Senator Calvin Ruck, who wrote the book on the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And he wrote that book, and I go back to when I said to you previously, he worked as a porter on the CN rail. He saw older black porters on the railroad, and I say older nowadays with a bit of a grin on my face because I realized they were probably relatively young men at the time, in their 40s, if that, right?
Careful.
Okay. You're very sensitive about that, I realize. But these men saw them with a lapel pin. They didn't recognize. He said, what was that? This was in about 1930s, 1940 perhaps. And they said, we were members of the Black Battalion, or the No. 2 Construction Battalion. He had never heard of it. My father's always had a love for history. And so when he saw this, he said, I started asking questions. And he said, I need to write about this. We can't lose this. That was in the 40s. It wasn't until 1987 that his book was issued because life took over. He had a family. He had his own trials and tribulations. But that book became really a place mark for the battalion. And it kept the story alive. But when he was working on it, there was nothing to be found. He found a box of documents in the National Archives. And there was Reverend White's diary. And that gave him the key to the battalion. And he began to write it. And at least at that point, in the 1970s and 1980s, a number of the members were still alive. And so he found them, talked to their families, and he began to document their history. And we now today know about the battalion because of that. But what I find great pleasure with, and we talk about the apology that came about, my father's objective in doing that was not that he keep this to himself. And this is why I took such a pleasure in the work that was being done for the national apology. Others were involved. Yourself, members of the Black community, members of the armed forces, right? You were representing the Canadian Armed Forces. People were sharing the story and telling the story through their own voice. People from across Canada were getting together, and you and I know that was not an easy task. that was hard work.
Tough work.
Right?
Yeah.
And you, once again, had to prove yourself that you could work with this community in a way that was constructive, respectful, and that you would listen. And listening was so important. And the work that you did was integral to this being a success. So finally, we had the point where the then Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, came to Toronto, Nova Scotia, and issued a public apology on the training grounds where the battalion had, in fact, been during the war years, or where they trained before going overseas. It was a day to be remembered. It was a day that communities gathered together.
I get goosebumps now. You actually saying
it was amazing.
It was amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah. It was absolutely amazing, And we gathered there and we listened and we honored those men from the battalion. The men are all gone. Now, in 1987, when the book was released, 1988, 89, there were still, I think, maybe 7 or 8 alive. And my father had been involved with the Black Cultural Center. They organized a reunion for these men at the Lord Nelson Hotel. And so what I like to tell is that when those men came in to be honored, the 9 of them or 7 of them came in to be honored, they were fragile, right? They were some were in wheelchairs. These men they'd gone through their own difficulties. When the piper was piping and the crowd stood to applaud them in, suddenly you watched their backs get straighter. And they walked up the center of that aisle. And I remember people just clapping, couldn't control themselves. It was such a moment. But they finally got the honor they deserved. We take that forward now to the apology given by the Prime Minister. And it was a day when all of those men weren't there. In spirit, each of them were, because their descendants were there. And it was once again when the Prime Minister said, "I am sorry on behalf of this country."
Yes. It was an excellent speech.
It was an excellent speech.
Yes.
It was all the things that the National Advisory Committee had said apology needs to contain.
Yes.
He hit it on the mark each and every time. And the crowd got to their feet again and applauded. And it was spontaneous.
It was.
It was absolutely spontaneous. And the Prime Minister, I think, was moved by it. And it was a glorious day. People hung around the after the event just to talk.
Right. And it was a hot day.
It was a hot day.
Yeah.
In fact, we could not have had better weather for it. I think it was one of those proud moments for all of us. And so, it was an excellent time for that, Barry.
Wow. So, well, thank you and your father for that impact. That's a good example of, we talk about evolution and learning and the journey. Well, here you had a whole armed forces, a whole government moved to a point of reconciliation and honor, right?
That's right. And that was interesting because, it was the military which had been the ones who initially, along with government officials, had told these men, you can't be part of this. So your involvement was so significant and so symbolic in many ways, because the very army that told them they couldn't be part of it was now they're saying they not only must be part of this, but it has to be honored in a proper way. So I think it was one of those transitional moments for all of us.
Yes.
To the next level.
And for those who have an interest, please feel free to visit Russell at the Black Cultural Center and join us in July. We have our annual parade in Pictou to commemorate the number 2 Construction Battalion, and we would love to see the crowds grow.
Absolutely correct, yeah.
So tell us about your role as the honorary for the PLF. So Princess Louise Fusiliers are a reserve infantry unit based here in Halifax, previously at the Halifax Armories, and soon to be moving in the coming years as the Armories is redone.
It's a role that I occupy with a great deal of pride. It's a role from which I get a great deal of satisfaction. And I will say, quite honestly, it's a role that I initially did not want.
Love the honesty.
When I was initially approached about becoming an honorary colonel, the response, at least initially to myself, was, why would I do that? I have seen no interest of being in the military. The story of the battalion, how these men were treated, etc. I watched my father, the work that he had done for all of this. And what I realized, however, is that the very things that were compelling me to say no were the very reasons why I had to say yes. How could I now be offered this opportunity after what those men had gone through to wear a Canadian uniform, the suffering they went through, the work that's done by my father trying to put the story together? I could not turn my back on that, right? And I agreed to it. And I thank Colonel Pitcher for his work in this. When I was approached about being this, I had no idea where it came from. And in fact, my initial response, if I find whoever did this, they're going to pay a price for it. And it was only after the fact.
That microphone makes a great weapon.
It does. It could serve as well. It was only after the fact that I realized that Barry had put my name forward. And I thank him for that once again for doing so, because it was not something that was on my horizon whatsoever. I was serious. I didn't have any plans on ever taking that role or putting on a uniform. But what made it even more special is that the first day I wore that uniform in public, actually the first day I wore the uniform at all, was at the apology for the No. 2 Construction Battalion. Because I had been ill prior to that time, I couldn't even try the uniform on, what would fit, what would happen. On that morning, the morning of the apology, I got up and put on the uniform. The first time I saw myself in the mirror was that morning. So I put on the uniform, got in the car, and drove to Truro, and listened to the apology, and made the response to the Prime Minister's apology while wearing the uniform of the Canadian Armed Forces, of the Princess Louise Fusiliers, hackle and all.
Hackle and all.
And it was a proud moment. And it was one of those moments that, once again, my father's spirit and that of those men of the battalion was certainly there, because I've always felt, and I think I may have mentioned that on that day, if there was anyone who should have had that uniform on, it was my father. That was his to wear, to stand. So once again, that's why I had to do this, right? Because of what it meant to Dad. And now when I'm involved with the Princess Louise Fusiliers, the PLF, there's still much work to be done, because part of the role that I play is also discussing the matters of inclusion. And the armed forces are making great changes. And I feel that from the top down, there is very real interest. It takes time, but if allowed, it can also be forgotten because there are other priorities. My being there allows me, by having the honorary title of colonel, gives me access to the rooms and the individuals that other men have access to. And I'm very appreciative of that fact. So if I ask to speak to the general, it will happen. It will happen. If just Doug Ruck going to ask there, it may eventually happen, but it's not going to happen, not the same response. But I feel that because they had the honorary colonel status, it makes a big difference.
Well, we're proud that you are an honorary, and you talk about breaking barriers. Let's transition now to Commissionaires, Commissionaires Nova Scotia,
Yes.
And I can say this, and you as the chair, we are a very older. Well, we're 100 years old across Canada this year, and we're traditional and very hierarchical, regimented ways in which people elevated themselves to board positions. Here you come. You're our first Black chair, I think, not only in Nova Scotia, across Canada. So you talk about diversity in the boardroom and the importance of balance. We have made great headway here in Nova Scotia. I think you would agree. But what are your thoughts now to the future of commissionaires in making sure that we keep pushing forward?
Given that there's been there's a very proud history, not all of which should be honored, but there's a very real history, and many parts of it are very respectable and need to be respected and kept there. But those parts which were exclusionary become a concern. It's very easy to return to that. The boardroom that we have at headquarters is a pictorial history of the board. And there's the rows and rows of the pictures of board members and the board chairs. Look as hard as you would, and hard as you may wish to, prior to my arrival, there were no faces of people of color on that wall whatsoever, neither as members nor as chairs. So one could not become a chair without becoming a member. One could not become a member unless they had been asked. And the evidence from what we see on the wall is that they weren't being asked. They weren't being seen as being viable candidates to take on this role. That's beginning to change. We have at least now have some diversity coming into the board. But diversity is not just numerical. Diversity is a frame of mind that allows you to appreciate the fact that you have a society made up of various people. The Corps of Commissionaires does not serve just one segment of society. And society is not made up of just one homogeneous group or one color or one ethnic group or one religious group, one gender, etc. It's many people. So we have to reflect that and reflect it by talking about it, by making it part of what we do each and every day. When I first arrived at CNS, Commissionaires Nova Scotia, that was not part of the regular conversation. It did not exist. So the first time I went there, I'm talking to a small, break off, and I'm talking to a small group, and I start raising them these questions about look around us, and we need to make change. Because we're talking about increasing membership, et cetera. And I'm saying there's an entire segment of society we're not even looking at. And I watched sort of his eyes glazed over. I said, well, that's not very promising, is it? And I talked to a couple of members, but it was disappointing because I saw so much of what I'd seen everywhere else. Groups that have a key role to play, but are very closed to the rest of society, aren't even aware of it. And when I became even more aware of this myself, and it became significant for me, we went in 2020, COVID. In 2020, on the street in Minneapolis, George Floyd is murdered. In the world of the Black population, that was significant. Not that it hadn't happened before, but the world was on pause. We watched in real time as this man died on the street. And it affected us in a very real way. Not a word was spoken by CNS about that. We're online having meetings. No one said, Doug, how are you doing? How are things going? We know this is a difficult time because it was a very racially infused time. It was silent. That almost became a moment when I was getting ready. I almost said to myself at that point, didn't I? I said to myself, actually, that I think I don't belong here, right? I may just have to withdraw. But I said, before I do that, I'm going to have to raise this because, dispatches, nothing was coming out, and it was quiet. And so I spoke to the CEO at the time, and I said, I have a problem here, a very real one. I said, I'm overwhelmed by the silence. I said, I'm not looking just for myself. It would have been nice. What about those other members, the commissionaires? Others out there in the field who are doing they work every day. What are we doing to see how they're doing? Nothing. How can we change this? That began the conversation. That began people asking how do we go about making a change? And what I realized is that the silence wasn't so much a thing of not caring. The silence was not knowing how to talk about it, how to raise it, not wanting to say the wrong thing in the wrong way at the wrong time, right? Which is a great inhibitor.
It is.
So let's begin having those discussions. Let's begin knowing that you're not perfect. Let's begin knowing that we'll stumble as an organization, but how do we begin to make a change? And that began looking at ourselves closer and starting to have those conversations around the table. Land acknowledgements.
Yes.
Right? Bringing in things that recognize there are other people in this province besides the group that are up on the wall there. And I began to feel that, okay, perfect, no, but we're making real headway. That's important. Not just for me as an individual. It's gone way beyond that now. But how do we make this an organization that's sustainable in the long run? And what kind of influence that organization, our organization, CNS, have on national and the other divisions? And what's come across, what I've seen, is that Nova Scotia has taken the lead in many of these areas. Nova Scotia is making a difference in these areas because the board members, people who are back on behalf of the board, CEO, are speaking up and saying, yes, but what about this? What about these issues? What about the equity committees? Why do we have these and why do we need them? And here's why. And we're not there. Because I can still go to meetings and look around, and I have a hard time finding anybody who will reflect back what I'm seeing, or what I don't see, rather. So CNS, Nova Scotia, is doing, I think, a real admirable job in changing. And I thank you personally for your dedication in making that difference. These are not easy conversations.
No.
Right? It can be exhausting, but they're necessary conversations. Not the problem is not to have them, but getting people used to have those conversations. It's training, it's understanding, it's learning. And let me say finally, I don't see it as it's not my responsibility to turn around CNS. I didn't create the problems, but I will assist the best of my ability in correcting some of these things.
Very powerful words. Thank you for your leadership. And I challenge any podcast out there to have a CEO and a board chair in the same room, bearing their souls as we did today. So I hope our viewers and listeners enjoyed today's episode. A lot of truth spoken, but we speak it for the good of humanity. Just to end off, Doug, we like to hear from all of our guests what the word service means to each person. So what would you say in a few words would be your meaning of service?
For me, it's complex. That probably doesn't surprise you. Very, very quickly, however, recognizing that in growing up in Nova Scotia, my mother and many other Black women in particular were domestics, cleaned homes. They were in domestic service. My mother was in service, right? My father worked on CN Rail. He was in service. Those were areas of Black service. For me now, service is giving back to the community, but it's giving back to those who went before, Barry. It's giving back to those who opened and kept open the doors that allowed me to be here with you, allowed me to serve as chair of CNS, allowed me to respond to the Prime Minister Paul, allowed me to go to law school. The service that I now give for nonprofit organizations is in recognition of all those individuals who in many ways didn't have the ability or given the opportunity to be part of organizations of this type. My father was a man who went to meetings every day. My father believed making a difference in housing and education. Right? But there was also many things he was not able to do. I'm able to do those other things. So around service is recognition and respect for those who did so much previously. Regardless of the color of their skin, I don't know everyone who really helped me along the road. But I know that I owe them that gratitude by doing the best that I can to do things for others as they come behind me. So that's what service means to me.
Thank you for your service, Doug. Thank you for your family legacy. And we dedicate today's episode to No. 2 Construction Battalion.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Purpose and Protection, brought to you by Commissionaires Nova Scotia. This show is hosted by Barry Pitcher, CEO of Commissionaires Nova Scotia. Scripting, marketing, and communications by Jill Smith and Renee McLeod of Commissionaires Nova Scotia. Editing and sound design by Connor Sampson and produced by Amina Faubert from Podstarter. Special thanks to Honourary Colonel Doug Ruck and to you, our listeners, for your continued support. This episode was recorded on April 11th, 2025 at Podstarter Studios. Purpose and Protection is recorded and produced in Halifax, Nova Scotia, also known as Chibuktuk. Located in Mi'kma'ki, this ancestral and unceded territory is subject to the peace and friendship treaties signed between the Mi'kmaq nations and the Crown, dating back to 1725. We recognize and respect the ongoing relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and these lands. We are all treaty people. We extend our heartfelt thanks to the service people and frontline workers who serve and protect our communities every day. Your dedication and sacrifice do not go unnoticed, and we are deeply grateful for all that you do. We look forward to sharing more stories with you next month. Until then, be sure to follow, rate, and share Purpose and Protection wherever you get your podcasts.